In this lesson, I'll be surveying what each of these two worldviews believes about various science fields if they're applied universally. So keep in mind, I'm mainly contrasting a young Earth creationist worldview with like a macroevolution is everything atheistic, one might consider Dawkinsian worldview. So I will be mentioning, other perspectives of the creation and macroevolution worldview throughout. Just keep in mind that's not the primary focus. This part three, will go over social sciences. We'll look at psychology, psychopathology, sociology, criminology, archaeology, linguistics, and end with looking at chronology. When it comes to psychology, which is the study of behavior and the mind, especially how it works and in regard to humans, a macroevolutionist perspective, one of many, evolutionary psychology, says that behaviors, mental faculties, their products, like for example, arts like music, religion in general, leadership, self-sacrifice, and parenting, especially when done by males, are the result of biological macroevolution. So really, this is less of a social science and much more of a life science with some social science mixed in. And therefore, it too has tons of overlap with neural Darwinism, which again, I'm not going to get into. The creationist perspective of biblical psychology, however, says many of these things can't be explained by mere biology, let alone nervous system macroevolution, because it doesn't exist. So, some answers must be sought outside of biology in philosophy and theology. So, in contrast, this is a theology/social science hybrid with minimal life science involvement. And except for the macroevolution denying, there are plenty of theistic macroevolutionists that agree with this. Let's do psychopathology, which is the study of mental illness. The less than common macroevolutionist perspective of evolutionary psychopathology says that mental illness appearance, prevalence, and extinction in a population are controlled by natural selection in a macroevolutionary way with phylogenetic involvement. And then the essentially fringe perspective of evolution of schizophrenia says that schizophrenia may still be around in populations because it has some unknown benefit, maybe similar to how sickle cell causing gene variations called alleles stick around because having just one makes you immune to malaria. And this kind of thinking could then be applied to other mental illnesses as well. However, the creationist perspective says that, mental illness is mental illness, so it doesn't have a net biological and population survival benefit, and there's more to it than natural selection, especially since the world must have been created by a divine creator who is therefore omnibenevolent. Think about that. And a lot of theistic macroevolutionists would agree with that stuff. And then the creationists would add, it also, of course, couldn't involve macroevolution and phylogeny at all. When it comes to sociology, which is the study of society and social interactions, a well-encompassing macroevolutionist perspective of socio or simply just cultural evolution has many approaches that have evolved in prominence over time. All of them kind of put together say that cultures, and possibly politics too, are comprised of units called memes. They likely adapt to their surroundings. They have changes that coincide with technological evolution and or population structure. They evolve over time through varying stages, which may or may not be done in a progression, and or might be biological in origin to some degree. However, the creationist perspective says that their politics and culture have no connection to biology, nor is there any totally uniform progression that can be found because of multitudinous outliers. And also, there are countless factors that can be involved in why a culture or politics change, so these macroevolutionist approaches are left lacking and can't always apply. When it comes to criminology, which is the study of crime and general deviance, of the numerous macroevolutionist perspectives, biosocial criminology has various approaches. One says all behaviors, including the criminal and deviant, are genetically caused by environmental influence and are therefore genetically inheritable. So I could actually can find a gene for a particular deviant or criminal act. 2, it's less in the DNA itself and more caused by general brain structure and function that doesn't necessarily have to do with the genes directly. Or 3, it's the testosterone causing all the trouble, and that's why most crimes are done by males. It explains it all, doesn't it? However, the creationist perspective says, 1, sin isn't physically genetic. You cannot find a gene that causes you to commit some sort of sin. And this proves that sin originates from something spiritual instead, hence why we all need a spiritual transformation, i.e. to be born again. 2, brain studies on the subject have only yielded results that fail to prove the premise, which fits since, again, such behaviors are not biological in origin. And 3, just really with the testosterone blaming, I mean, come on, not cool. And it ignores positive displays of masculinity, which I know, according to our current culture, seems foreign, but they actually do exist. Comes to archaeology, which is a study of past human activity through artifacts, so really kind of the social science version of paleontology. A couple not too common, especially the Dawkinsian first one, macroevolutionist perspectives of evolutionary archaeology and evolutionary ecology applied to archaeology. The first says that cultural traits called memes undergo a sort of sociological natural selection, like how genetic traits do. The second says that phenotypic visual trait adaptations to social and or ecological environment variation cause cultural and behavioral changes, and both claim to be supported by archaeological discoveries, of course. However, the creationist perspective says that the so-called memes don't really show any following of some sort of natural selection kind of pattern. And also, genetics and phenotypes aren't sufficient to entirely explain cultures, behaviors, and their changes because our socializations and behaviors are beyond our biology, which is agreed upon by some theistic macroevolutionists. When it comes to linguistics, which is the study of languages, the macroevolutionist perspective of the evolution of languages, held by a fair number of them, says that all languages and language families slowly evolved universally out of one original human language that came from ape-like vocalizations, this done so over tens of thousands of years, coinciding with the hominid macroevolutionary timeline. Though I'll point out there are some macroevolutionists that don't think all human languages originate from one original human language. The creationist perspective, that I'll call baraminological linguistics, says that the various language families must have had a supernatural origin due to the incomparability of language and animal vocalizations. Also, imperfect alignment of languages. You know how there's not a perfect one-to-one ratio for every word for every language. Also, the non-existence of the hominid macroevolution timeline, and the historicity of the Babel event. When it comes to chronology, which is the study of timelines, the almost universal macroevolutionist perspective of big history says that around 13.8 billion years ago, give or take some 100,000, the universe began and macroevolution started forming the periodic elements and celestial phenomena. Then around 4.6 billion years ago, the sun formed, and then the earth within 100,000 years afterward. Around 3.5 billion years ago, the first organism existed. 315 to 320 million years ago, the first reptiles existed. 165 to 150 million years ago, the first avians, so like birds, existed. Around 52.5 million years ago, first bats existed. around 300,000 years ago, first humans existed. There was no global flood, and multiple ice ages, and then you have the rest of history. And most of this, except for the macroevolution parts, is actually agreed upon by many old Earth creationists. The young Earth creationist perspective says that around 6,000 years ago, the universe began and the Earth existed but was without form. Then in the next 24-hour period, the Earth was formed. 24-hour period after that, organisms are known to have appeared. If microbes didn't exist before then, not sure. Then 24-hour period after that, the sun and all other celestial bodies formed. 24-hour period after that, avians and bats first existed. 24-hour period after that, first reptiles existed, including dinosaurs, and humans first existed then also. Then around 2,000 years after that, the year-long global flood happened with a single ice age taking place for several hundred years right after that, and the rest of history starting from around 100 years after the global flood.